I've always liked stories about the end of the world. It doesn't matter if it's natural disasters, man-made Armageddons, or monster-driven catastrophes. I think there's something special about stories where people are trying to hold on to each other when the world is emptier and everything else is gone. There's also something cool about trying to come up with novel and creative ways to make it through the apocalypse. In some stories, the end of the world is boring. Mostly because authors keep reusing the same unimaginative solutions. Zombie apocalypse, fight the zombies. Alien invasion, fight the aliens. Nuclear war, fight in the wasteland. Asteroid impact, blow it up with nukes. Extinction in these cases becomes an elementary equation solved by the simplest of formulas. Identify the threat, assemble the heroes, punch the problem until it goes away. But what if the fight or die mentality fails us? What if the enemy is one you can't see, can't touch, and can't fight? What if there's no villain to defeat, and no hero to save the day? What then?
There are hundreds of Sheliak on the way. They can obliterate you from orbit. You will die, never having seen the faces of your killers.
When every choice leads to annihilation, isn't it possible to get creative about survival? Science fiction stories are particularly good at exploring these creative scenarios for survival, and Star Trek stands out, exploring these concepts in multiple episodes across several series. Ethically complex solutions to the extinction problem, solutions that sometimes require redefining the very meaning of survival. Human approaches that are simultaneously brilliant and disturbing, practical and horrifying, successful and morally questionable. I think it's worth looking more closely at 5 instances when Star Trek rewrote the rules of extinction storytelling. Episodes that showcase radically different approaches to the ultimate problem. How to stay alive. From transforming warfare into a video game to preserving your essence in someone else's memories, these solutions range from ingenious to horrifying. But they all share one common attribute. They work.
Computers, Captain. They fight their war with computers, totally.
Yes, of course.
Picture this. Your civilization has been locked in a devastating war for hundreds of years. Entire cities lie in ruins, populations decimated, your culture in the brink of collapse. There is no possibility of peace, at least it doesn't seem so. But what if there was a way to keep fighting without the destruction? What if war could become civilized? This is the solution found by the people of Eminiar 7. By the time the Enterprise entered the orbit of their planet, they had been at war with Vendikar, the third planet in their system, for 500 years. Long ago, both planets realized that if their war was to continue, neither civilization would survive. So they came to an agreement. Rather than fighting each other with weapons, they would wage a virtual war, in which computer simulations determined the casualties, and those selected to die would simply have to report to disintegration stations.
You must understand, Captain. We have been at war for 500 years. Under ordinary conditions, no civilization could withstand that. But we have reached a solution. Our civilization lives. The people die, but our culture goes on.
The problem is that when Enterprise entered orbit, they became a target. And when his crew was ordered to report to a disintegration station, Captain Kirk had to make a decision that could plunge 2 worlds back into a bloody war. The Eminian survival strategy offers an intriguing solution to a very old question. How do you maintain a functioning society while engaged in war? The Second World War, for instance, devastated not just armies, but entire societies. By 1945, Germany was so desperate that the Nazi regime conscripted boys as young as 12 and sent them to the front. Major cities across Europe were reduced to rubble. Railways, hospitals, libraries and schools were systematically bombed. For years after the bomb in Hiroshima, the population was dealing with the after effects of radiation exposure. In contrast, the Eminians' gamification of war preserves infrastructure, avoids depletion of younger generations, prevents mass displacements, and bypasses the problems of war shortages and economical strain.
There is a certain scientific logic about it.
I'm glad you approve.
I do not approve. I understand.
In order to save his crew, Captain Kirk decided to destroy the Eminians' computers and force them to engage in a real war with Vendikar. That, or make peace. He pointed out that war is supposed to be messy.
Death, destruction, disease, horror. That's what war is all about, Anan. You've made it neat and painless. So neat and painless, you've had no reason to stop it.
Captain Kirk's intervention poses a provocative thought. Is there a purpose to the suffering of war? There was something particularly shocking about the way the Armenians accepted the inevitability of volunteering for their deaths, an attitude personified by the character of Mia 3.
I too have been declared a casualty. I must report to a disintegrator by noon tomorrow.
Is that all it means to you? To report and die?
While most apocalypse fiction ends with restoration of the status quo, A Taste of Armageddon suggests that some problems can only be solved by making them impossible to ignore. It's not about finding the right weapon or the perfect strategy, it's about forcing a civilization to confront the true cost of their choices. The Armenians successfully figured out a way to avoid extinction, but in doing so they became desensitized to the loss of life. By deciding that efficiency was more important than humanity, they stripped themselves away of what makes survival worthwhile.
We're going to try and stop the killing.
Try to help. Believe me.
On the opposite end of that, we have Deep Space Nine's second season episode Sanctuary. This episode introduces us to the Skrian, another civilization threatened by the destruction of war.
We are the Shkriya. My people need your help. There's no time to waste.
In their case, however, the enemy was too powerful to even contemplate a balance of terror, so they had no choice but to run away. Trying to find a new home is a more traditional solution to the problem of surviving extinction. Star Trek has featured it many times, from convoys of humans fleeing the Xindi in the alternative timeline of Twilight to the people of Yonada in For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky.
For the world is hollow, and I have touched the sky.
But I think it's worth bringing up this episode for two reasons. First, because it has so many parallels with real-world situations, and second, because it's a clever inversion on the traditional alien invasion trope. Sanctuary flips this trope upside down by asking, what if the aliens are desperate? What if instead of invading, they asked for help? The Skrian are the last of their kind, a group of 3 million refugees whose homeworld has been rendered uninhabitable. Their solution to extinction is perhaps the most human one imaginable. Guided by their religious belief in Kantana, a promised land, they cross the wormhole into the Alpha Quadrant, hoping to find their new home. The problem begins when the Skrians become convinced that Bajor, an inhabited planet, home of the Bajorans, is the promised Kantana of their prophecies. At this point in Deep Space Nine, Bajor has only recently emerged from 50 years of brutal occupation by the Cardassians. Their own people are scattered and the planet is going through a famine. The Skrians, however, are not discouraged. Most of them are farmers. They believe they can make one of Bajor's peninsulas bloom again. But the Bajoran authorities remain unconvinced, and they ultimately decide to turn the Skrians away. Bajor's official reason for that is a limitation of resources. However, the episode also goes out of its way to show just how different the Skrians are from everyone else in the Alpha Quadrant. When they first arrive, their language is so alien that the universal translator doesn't work, something quite rare at this point in Star Trek, and there are multiple instances of hostilities during their time in the station. There's an interesting unwritten story here. What would happen if instead of Bajor, the Skrians concluded that Kantana was Earth, or Vulcan, or Andoria? None of those words would have had the recent scars of Cardassian occupation to fall back on as a reason to turn the Skrian away. Would a refugee group of 3 million people be welcomed then? And if they weren't, what would that say about the Federation? The Skrian crisis is not an intellectual puzzle. It's a resource allocation problem that reframes survival as a political issue, because the Skrians don't need to defeat an army, they need to navigate immigration policy. This approach is creative because it rarely makes into science fiction stories. When faced with civilizational threats, most stories default to either military solutions or technological fixes. The idea that survival might depend on negotiation, compromise, and political accommodation is so mundane that it rarely appears in genre fiction.
Our technology is 900 years out of date.
Your pessimism is irrelevant.
What if instead of running away, you could just wait it out? Skip the apocalypse entirely, take a nice long nap and wake up when the danger had passed. In their 6th season, while fleeing from a hostile fleet of alien vessels, Voyager lands on a planet whose atmosphere is charged with radiogenic particles. The place is in the middle of a nuclear winter, and before the windows of the ship are the ruins of what used to be a city of millions. Hiding from their pursuers, Voyager detects faint life signs underground, and when the captain beams over, they discover a hidden chamber filled with hundreds of stasis pods. In those pods are the last of the Vaadwaur, survivors from an ancient war. 900 years ago, the Vaadwaur were locked in a conflict with several enemy species. They were losing, and a subset of their population came up with an audacious solution. Instead of fighting or running away, they decided to wait it out. The plan was to stay in stages for 5 years, after which they would wake up, move to a new world, make allies and rebuild their civilization. By then, they thought, the conflict would be over. Something went wrong, however. The pods malfunctioned, and the surviving Vaadwaur remained unconscious for 9 centuries, until Voyager came along and 7 of 9 woke one of them up.
Dragon's teeth, an old Greek myth. After a dragon was killed in a war, its teeth were spread out over the battlefield. They took root, and warriors sprung from the ground to continue the fighting.
This wasn't the first time Star Trek dealt with long-time stasis. Back in the first season of The Next Generation, in Neutral Zone, Data awakens 3 humans from the 20th century who were asleep in cryogenic pods. Dragon's Teeth pushes this idea further by making an entire civilization, or what is left of it, displaced in time. The Vaadwaur discover that the war doesn't stop changing just because you're not watching. When they emerge from their pods, their war is over, but so is everything else. Their language is extinct, their territory is occupied, their entire context has been erased. They survive by becoming anachronisms in their galaxy. The descendants of their enemies now use their name as a metonymy for fools.
But Vaadwaur is a word in the old tongue. It means foolish.
And because they are the same people they were 900 years ago, many of them are eager to regroup and continue the war from where they left off.
Our plan was to reoccupy one of our former colonies, gain allies, rebuild our forces, take back what was ours.
They end up getting caught in a conflict that nearly destroys their ship. 53 of the Vaadwaur ships escape into ion corridors, disappearing into far regions of space. Whether or not they'll make it is anyone's guess.
Their technology is 9 centuries out of date. Their plans for conquest are irrelevant.
They're a resourceful species, determined. They'll adapt. I doubt we've seen the last of them.
It's possible she was speaking literally. Something on the planet may have transformed them, physiologically.
What if there was no way to save your people? What if the only solution was to adopt someone else? To become someone else? What if we went even further than that? We have seen the first iteration of this idea in The Next Generation, when the Aldeans, believing themselves victims of a genetic plague, decided to steal the Enterprise's children and raise them as their own. Later, on Voyager, Ensign Lindsay Ballard, who previously died in an away mission, is reanimated and altered by the Kobali, a species whose form of reproduction relies on reanimating alien corpses and altering their DNA. But the most disturbing and philosophically charged iteration of this theme happened in Enterprise's Season 3, Extinction. In this episode, while Enterprise is traveling through the expanse, they pursue a Xindi ship that may have information relevant to their mission. Captain Archer, T'Pol, Ensign Sato and Lieutenant Reed take a shuttle down to the planet in pursuit of the alien, but from the moment they land, something appears to be wrong. They find bodies on the surface, but the bodies are not Xindi, at least not from any of the Xindi species they have come in contact with. Pretty soon, the 3 humans start to feel like something is wrong, and before long, a transformation takes place. Their facial features change, they start speaking some alien language, they move differently, and even their internal organs are changed. T'Pol seems to be the only one not entirely affected by the transformation. Back on the ship, Phlox eventually works out that the away team was exposed to a mutagenic virus that altered their bodies and their DNA, effectively transforming them into another species. As it turns out, an ancient species native to that world, the Loquac, created the virus a long time ago as a way to preserve their species after some unknown event made it so that they couldn't reproduce. T'Pol was unaffected because Vulcan K cells appear to provide her with some immunity to the virus, and Phlox wants to use that as the basis for a treatment. But the effects of the virus are so devastating that there are laws in this region of space to immediately euthanize all of the infected. What follows is a nerve-wracking race against the clock, while Phlox attempts to develop a cure, and Trip does his best to protect the away team from the alien enforcers. All the while on the planet, Archer and Hoshi are dragged into Poe to the ruins of the ancient capital of Urquhart, because the virus doesn't just transform the affected into Loquac, it also creates an ingrained desire to return to their capital and rebuild. This is one of the coolest science fiction concepts on Enterprise, and it's probably tied with the next entry on this list for the most creative way to survive an apocalyptic event. It also deserves praise for how it ended. The heroes eventually manage to develop a cure for the disease, but when they do, Phlox still has a sample of the virus on storage, and it's up to Captain Archer to decide what to do with it.
This is the last of the mutagenic virus. I assume you want me to destroy it.
No. This was created as a final effort to preserve a civilization, a people. That species we became, they cease to exist the moment this virus is gone.
Captain.
We came out here to stop the Xindi from destroying humanity. I'll be damned if I'm gonna have a hand in destroying another race in the process. Put it on ice, Doc.
Number 1 in our list is The Inner Light, probably the best episode of The Next Generation and a strong contender for the top 3 of all Star Trek episodes ever. During a routine magnetic survey, the Enterprise detects an unidentified object that turns out to be an alien probe. The probe emits a low-level nucleonic beam, and the captain falls down, unconscious, somehow affected by the probe. When he opens his eyes, Jean-Luc is no longer on the Enterprise, but down on some planet. There's a woman tending to him. She calls him Kamin, and she doesn't seem threatening, but he doesn't know where he is. After a brief walk, he comes across someone else who seems to know him as Kamin, Council Leader Bataille. In time, the captain learns he's in the rustic community of the planet Catan. Everybody seems to think he's an iron weaver named Kamin, and that he's been ill with a fever for a long time. Eileen, the woman tending to him when he first came to, is his wife, or at least she claims to be, and there doesn't seem to be any way that he can contact the Federation. The next time we see the captain, 5 years have gone by. He is still on Catan, still married to Eileen. They have a better relationship now. He has told her many stories about his life on board Enterprise, but in 5 years he's gotten no indication that his life as a starship captain was real. He has a life on the planet now as well. He's been learning to play the flute, and he's involved in the efforts to make their political leaders acknowledge the seriousness of the drought that is currently affecting their province. The story proceeds in time jumps, alternating between the crew's efforts to awaken the captain and his life down on the planet. We follow as Kamin has 2 children, loses a dear friend, and watches his children grow up, proud of his daughter's scientific acumen, concerned about his son's lack of direction in life. And all the while he's growing old, the environmental situation of the planet is worsening. The planet is dying, and there doesn't seem to be anything anyone can do. It's only when Kamin is a very old man, surrounded by his grandchildren, that we learn the truth. The planet Catan did die hundreds of years ago. There was nothing they could do to save the people, but they did make one last effort to save their civilization. A probe launches into space with the goal of one day finding an emissary that could be made to experience what life was like when they were around, so he could tell their story and perpetuate their culture.
It's me. Isn't it?
This is what has been happening. He lived a lifetime on that planet in the space of 25 minutes, and when it was all over, it was time to go back to the ship. The Inner Light is one of my favorite Star Trek episodes. It's beautiful and poetic in a bittersweet way, and it definitely deserves the top spot on a list of creative ways of surviving extinction. None of the people survive, but their culture lives on through Jean-Luc, which in itself invites questions about the meaning of survival. Critically, the Catanians didn't choose to send a library of their collective knowledge and history into orbit. Instead, they had someone experience what it was like to live as a member of their society, to marry, to have children, to grow old, to understand who they were and why they mattered. Once the probe was finished with its mission, there was only one thing left: the flute Captain Picard taught himself to play in a small box. The music of Catan will live on, immortal not through libraries of collected audio records, but because they taught someone how to play it. There's a touch of sadness to these as well. The thought of all of the things that are now lost forever, and all the people that don't exist anymore. It is scary to think that this solution is one we might need ourselves one day.
Seize the time, Maribor. Live now. Make now always the most precious time. Now will never come again.
Working on my next video, which is going to be about the genetics of hair color in the world of Game of Thrones, so I think that should be very cool. How do we find the right angle? Oh, the dinosaur behind here is cool, isn't it? Live long and prosper.